Hi, Susan, and welcome back to 𝙃𝙧𝙧𝙧 podcast. It's really great to have you back again.
Hi, Katie. It's great to be here again.
Thank you. Well, last time, Susan, we had you on and you shared a bit of your own testimony, and you also shared some of the signs that we can see coming up to show us that we're really close to the soon return of Christ and the beginning of Jacob's trouble. We talked about the COP27 and the one world religion that we can see forming there, especially with the UN Mount Sinai meet. And we also talked about the stage that's being set for the Gog and Magog war and how we can see that approaching on the horizon now. We're going to continue on that theme today and talk about the third temple. So I would like to know from you, just to lay a groundwork for us, what is the significance of the third temple in Bible prophecy?
Well, I think the first significance or the most primary significance is when we look in Daniel chapter 9, specifically verse 27, when, I'll just read it here. That will make it easy. And the Antichrist shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be upon the desolate. That's Daniel 9:27. So if the Antichrist, first, when he confirms this covenant with Israel and her enemies, he allows them to rebuild the temple if it's not already built at that time and start their sacrifices and worship again. But at the midpoint of that 70th week of Daniel, or the week of Jacob's trouble, halfway in at the 3.5-year mark, he goes into that temple, performs what we now call the abomination of desolation, and says, you're going to now worship me. I am God. That's what he says. For him to do that, before him to cause the temple to be desolate, for the Jews to be able to start their worship and their sacrifices again, there has to be a third temple, right? And we know that we have the first temple, Solomon's temple, and then Herod's temple. Herod's temple was destroyed under a Roman army led by General Titus, who later became Emperor Titus, in 70 AD. So the Jews have not had a temple since 70 AD, but they've been planning for it. And actually, they've done quite a lot of planning. But we know that third temple has to be there. We know it is significant in that last week, that final week of the 70 weeks of Daniel, what we call the tribulation, the 7 years. And it's significant. It marks the halfway point. In fact, that is the point where the Antichrist becomes fully possessed by Satan and continues for the next 42 months. It's pretty important.
Right. So we can see then that it doesn't necessarily have to be built and established at the beginning of Jacob's trouble, but it needs to be established at least by the midpoint, you would say. Is that right?
Correct. And with the site of the temple being the political football that it is right now in Jerusalem, the Jews do not have access to the mount where they believe that temple should be. Now, we can get into quite a discussion about where that temple should be. There's been a lot of contention about that. But God led David to the city of Jebus to build the first temple. And he led Nehemiah, when they were released from Babylon, back to Jerusalem to build the second temple. I don't have any question that God's able to lead those that are building the third temple to the right spot to build it. So I don't think that's going to be something that's going to be argued. But right now, if the Temple Mount, where the dome, the gold dome is, if that is the site that is to be the temple, I'm sorry, my cat is interrupting me. then right now it would be impossible for the Jews to build it. They don't even have access to the site except for very specific periods of time on specific days of the week. So that political football will have to be resolved if that's where the temple's going to be. And I have some ideas about how that's going to be resolved, but we can talk about that in another broadcast if you want.
Would actually like to ask you about that, Susan. If you were going to say, how you would foresee potentially that, say the Dome of the Rock becoming back under Jewish, control there, how would you foresee that happening?
Well, okay. This is hypothetical.
Mm-hmm.
We don't actually know when the war of Gog and Magog occurs. It could be a pre-tribulation event. I believe it is. It could also occur during the tribulation, but it's not referenced in Revelation at all. I'm talking about the war, Ezekiel 38-39 war. So many scholars have kind of come to the conclusion that it is a pre-tribulation event. Now, whether it precedes the rapture or not, we don't know. It could actually happen on the same day, the rapture and the war of Gog and Magog. But since we're kind of speculating here, we know how the war of Gog and Magog ends, right?
Mm-hmm.
Israel's enemies are wiped out, decimated through a supernatural fall of fire and brimstone from heaven.
Right.
And so that could be the point where the Antichrist steps up on the global platform and says, okay, I'm going to negotiate a peace treaty between you and these enemies that are now decimated. And you can build your temple now because the Muslims are no longer in control of the Dome of the Rock.
I see. So that actually could be a scenario that fits. That does actually make sense. And like you said, I mean, the Gog and Magog war, whether that's before or after the rapture, it's not biblically specified. So it could be the case that the rapture happens first, the Gog and Magog war is actually kicked off from that event perhaps, and then the covenant is actually formed after the Gog and Magog war. I wonder whether that will perhaps be the way it happens. We will wait and find out. So Susan, on this subject of the temple then, how can we see this forming? I mean, we know that it hasn't necessarily, no construction has started. They haven't even, identified where it's going to be. What, if any, can we see in terms of preparations that the Jews have made for the building of the third temple?
Well, there's quite a list. And this actually goes back to the mid-1980s when the Temple Faithful and the Temple Institute, both of those are very active in the preparations for the temple, kind of started up. And there was a time when they were pushing for government assistance to push forward the temple. That hasn't happened yet. So they've been very active, and in the last several years, and we're going to talk about what's happened most recently at the end, but we know that, for instance, the temple coin, and actually there's been two versions of the temple coin. The first one had President Trump on one side and Cyrus the Great on the other. Mm-hmm. Now they've combined it. So let's talk about some of the preparations that have been done. Mm-hmm. So we've got the temple coin, mm-hmm. Completion of the many sacred vessels that are used in service in the Holy Temple. Those are all done. The sacred garment or ephod of the Kohen Haggadah, as well as his chosen or breastplate, that's all done. The golden crown is done, is complete and ready. In fact, all the priests now that have been selected for service to this temple have all their garments ready, hanging up, ready to wear.
Wow.
The building plans for the temple are complete. Of course, those have been complete for several thousand years, but they refreshed them, made them new, and that's done.
Mm-hmm.
The table of showbread is done. The altar of incense is done. The huge golden menorah, and there are some estimates that this golden menorah is worth around $5 million in U.S. dollars.
Wow.
That's done. And here's something that I found very interesting. The Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant has been lost since Babylon destroyed the first temple. But there are two rabbis from the Temple Institute that have stated they have been to where the Ark of the Covenant is, and it is ready to be retrieved and placed back into this third temple. That's been a couple of years ago. They had actually found that in late 2020 or early 2021, or at least that's when they announced it. Now, when they actually found it, we don't know. Wow. There are some theories out there. Jerusalem sits on a network of caves and caverns.
Mm-hmm.
And there is theory that the Ark of the Covenant was hidden away in one of these caves underneath Jerusalem, and that's where it's been for all this time, but we don't know.
So they believe they have it in their possession and it's ready for, installation into the third temple.
Correct. These are two senior rabbis in the Temple Institute, so I don't think they're lying. I trust what they're saying, but I found that interesting.
Absolutely.
Now, you had mentioned that no construction had been started, and actually, while no construction on the actual site has been done, by Jewish tradition, there can be no metal work or stone work done at the site. Any finishing of the stones, carving, shaping, has to be done where the stones are found and then moved to the site. And at this point, the cornerstone is done, complete, and I think the last I heard, there were quite a few of the other building stones that are shaped, trimmed, ready to be put in place. Yeah, that was the first one. That was the first one that was done, and then they started working on these other ones. But they cannot do work or ironwork. No sound of pick or axe or tools can be heard at the site of the temple. This all has to be finished and then brought piece by piece and put together, assembled at the temple site.
I mean, you've just given us a list of all the things that they've created and they've built. Are there any other things in terms of the ceremonies and things that need to happen before the temple is opened, or when they begin the sacrifices that have been already prepared?
I'm so glad you asked that question. Yes, first of all, in 2021, the Temple Institute, again, started a training center in the Jericho Valley to train the Levites in service to the temple. So that's preparation for rituals and traditions, worship.
That's fine.
So they started this training site, training the priests right now. One of the other things, I want to mention one more thing too. The 4,000 harps that are used in the temple were almost completely done, completely finished, very close to finishing at the house of Harari in Israel. And in late 2021, they had a fire and burned the house down, destroyed all those harps that had been finished or in process at that time, and they had to start all over again. I have not seen an update lately on how far they've gotten with the new harps, but they were very close and then lost them all. One of the very interesting things that has happened here recently, September of this year, early September, they announced they're going to be building, this is the Israeli government, Jerusalem, coming out of Jerusalem, They are building a high-speed railway to connect directly from Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv directly to Jerusalem. The reason for this high-speed railway is to service all the Jews that will be flying into Ben Gurion from all over the temple. Now, this high-speed railway is not just a passenger train. It is also going to include cars with facilities for livestock because of all the sacrifices these people will be bringing to the temple in Jerusalem. That high-speed railway is said to be complete by spring of next year, spring of 2023. One interesting note, the terminal near the western wall, the end of this high-speed train, will be named for President Trump. Now let's talk about one of the very recent things, and this was all over the news, it was all over the internet, quite fascinating, the arrival of those 5 red heifers. Yeah, they had tried in Jerusalem to breed these red heifers, and when they got to the age where they could start checking them over, and believe me, these priests go over these red heifers with a microscope. I mean, they are examining every hair just about on the body of these red heifers. They couldn't do it. So the Temple Institute sent 2 priests to the U.S. They found this rancher in Texas that had heard about the red heifers and the need for those red heifers and had started breeding for them. So they visited his ranch in Texas. They bought 5 red heifers, yearlings, and those were just arrived in Jerusalem, a month ago, 6 weeks ago? They had to be in quarantine for 10 days. And Jewish tradition says that they can't be used until they're 2 years and 1 day old. But that red heifer, the blood of that red heifer is what is used to purify the ground where the temple goes first, and then it's also used going forward to purify priests or anybody really that has come in contact with a dead person because they're unclean. So that blood of that red heifer, when they're sacrificed, is saved and used over and over again. In fact, throughout the history of the temple, there have only been 9 red heifers used. This will be the 10th. Something interesting in Jewish tradition about that 10th is that they say the 10th red heifer is sacrificed by the Messiah. Now, we know that's not the real Messiah, but when you look at what happens with this confirming of the peace treaty and the revealing of the Antichrist, the Jewish people are quite enamored of this man at that time and may in fact believe he is the Messiah. We don't know that right now. They're going to be very cautious about tracking those dates and those birth dates. Now, one of the things that they are going to be doing and have already done before those red heifers were even shipped out of Dallas or Texas, they went over them with a fine-tooth comb. I believe they can only have 5 off-colored hairs on their whole body. I think that 5 number is right, but it's very, very low. If they have 6, then that's it. They can't be used. It got a lot of attention on the internet, well worth attention. I mean, it should have gotten a lot of attention. From the Jews, it gets a lot of attention because this gets them one step closer to having that third temple. And of course, for Christians and Messianic Jews, it's one more sign pointing to the times that we are in.
Absolutely. Okay, so far we have so many of the ornaments that are going inside the temple that have been made, been created, the priestly garments been created. We have construction of some of the stones, including the cornerstone of the temple. We have a train that is being built right now, a train line to the Temple Mount, and we have the red heifers that are needed for the sacrifice for the opening for the building of the temple. So are there any other things? I mean, that's quite a list. Is there more that has been done?
That's all that's being announced on Temple Institute or through the Temple Faithful. I would suspect that there's a lot more going on behind the scenes that they haven't announced yet. And they're being a little quiet about it right now. There's not been a lot of announcements other than these red heifers. Let's talk for a minute about how long it's going to take to actually construct that temple. There are a lot of estimates out there with current equipment and everything. But, I mean, there's one estimate that says it's going to take 5 weeks. I think that's maybe a little ambitious, but maybe not. I'm not in construction, so I don't know. Some say as little as 6 to 8 months.
Okay.
So they literally could start construction, lay that cornerstone tomorrow if they were allowed to do so. We talked about, the site has been a political football, and we don't really know how that's going to be resolved. The speculation that I mentioned at the beginning of this is entirely speculation. It's biblical. I mean, it doesn't conflict with Scripture, end-time Scripture, end-time prophecy, but that may or may not be how it happens. But the first thing has to be resolved is where that temple is going to be built. But again, God has led 2 previous temples to be built where he wanted them built. I just have this feeling that he's not going to shirk on that this time either.
Absolutely. I don't think that's out of his control at all. I mean, this has been something that's been in the works for 2,000 years. I think he has a plan for orchestrating a site for the third temple. We will keep our eyes peeled for more news on this, but also be aware that we don't actually need to see anything else that needs to transpire before Christ comes for the church. So that is an encouragement in itself, just to know how much they have done in the works for this, and pretty much they're ready to set construction anytime from this point forward and have it built for that midpoint marker in the week of Jacob's trouble. I would love, Susan, if you would share with us, you are not only an author of eschatology, but you also are a poet and have written a book called Road to the Cross that is full of poetry. And you have one that you have written to share with us.
I would love to. Now, I have to warn you, when I'm writing these poems, I am writing, well, sometimes they get emotional. Okay. This is called Wake Up, and I wrote this, let's see, when did I write this? In 1998. Oh Lord, is your day coming? Are we in the times of the end? Are these events the signs, those which your prophets pretend? Wars and rumors of wars, plagues and horrors of every kind occur so often in these days we no longer pay them any mind. Our hearts have become as stone. Even the church has turned against you. Sin is so acceptable we no longer believe death is its due. The new age of humanity has dawned and takes its place among those who believe by acts we are saved, and not by your grace. Jesus is deemed a wise man or perhaps a prophet, but no more. The greatest story ever told is called fiction, a piece of lore. Animals of the earth are counted as more than a child. Babies are sacrificed, but we must protect the wild. Wake up, the bride of Christ. Can't you see the hour is near? Don't be caught while sleeping. Open your ears, and his voice you will hear. He is standing at the vestibule. Your place has been prepared. In the not-so-distant future, his home you will share. Not all has been fulfilled. There's still more to come. But there's no time to rest, as many more souls must be won. Names are written in the book of life, but they haven't been given the chance. They must hear the gospel to accept it. As your messengers, we must advance. Closer draws the hour with every passing day. Even 1 minute lost in dreaming could mean one less that is saved. Wake up, the New Jerusalem. Now is the time. The harvest is waiting in the fields and must not be left on the vine. Take care not for your future. Leave your belongings behind. Follow him, and you will be safe from the horrors of the end time.
You know, just at the end of that poem, take care not for your future and leave your belongings behind. I mean, it's completely contrary to the wisdom of the world, and yet it is what Christ tells us and what we can really have hope in, especially those of us who are aware and who know what's coming on the world, and our hearts have already been prepared to leave it. We're feeling this way. We're feeling the disconnect from the world, and we're feeling this longing for home, and we're feeling that we're more and more out of place here than we ever have been before. And those words just reaffirm that. And I just thank you for sharing that. And thank you so much for joining me today, Susan.
Thank you. There's one thing I want to mention. You talked about how we are to be separate from the world. The word in the Bible, ecclesia, the Greek word, that means separate, out of, separate, away from the world. The church is supposed to be separate from the world. But today we see churches that are absorbing culture. And that grieves me. That could be a whole different discussion, but that's something that really grieves me that we see in the churches today. But yeah, we're supposed to leave it all behind and give everything to him.
Amen. Look, if anyone would like to connect with Susan, she is on Harpazo Club, so you come and find her there at www.harpazo.club. We have an Android app and an iOS app as well, and her works, some of her work is on our website under the resources tab, and we have links to her own websites there under the tab. So check that out. And if you would like to come and have a chat with me and share with me your own testimony of how you came to know Christ and what's on your heart in terms of looking at the end times, then please send me a message at Harpazo Club. So God bless you, Susan, and I am sure that we will have a third conversation very soon.
Thank you. God bless you, Katie, and thank you for all you're doing here. Good night.